Imagine a city where the air is so thick with humidity, spices, and music that you can almost taste it. A place where the rules of the old world came to die, and something loud, wild, and beautiful was born. This was New Orleans in 1910, the most unique city in America, and the cradle of a revolution called jazz. But how did a swampy port town change the sound of the world forever? What was it like to walk through Storyville at midnight? How did a mix of French, African, and Spanish cultures create a musical gumbo? And what did the city look like before the silence was broken by the first trumpet blast? In 1910, New Orleans was a sensory explosion. It was a city of 340,000 people, but it felt like a world of its own, isolated by the swamps and the mighty Mississippi. The skyline was dominated by the St. Louis Cathedral and the iron-laced balconies of the French Quarter. Moss-covered brick and peeling plaster told stories of a century of history. The streets were a chaotic mix of mud and cobblestones. Massive draft horses pulled wagons filled with cotton bales and sugarcane toward the busy docks. The sound of the city was its pulse. In 1910, music wasn't something you went to see. It was something you lived in. It poured out of every window and every open door. New Orleans was the only place in America where African traditions had survived so vibrantly. In Congo Square, the ghost of ancient drumbeats still echoed in the rhythmic life of the streets. Architecture was a dialogue between luxury and decay. Grand mansions on St. Charles Avenue sat miles away from the crowded, humid shotgun houses of the trim. The shotgun house is a New Orleans icon, built narrow and long so a bullet could fly from the front door straight through the back. This design allowed the breeze to fight the tropical heat. In 1910, the heat was managed by wisdom. Wide porches, high ceilings, and the constant waving of handheld fans during church and at the market. Storyville was the city's most famous and infamous district, a legally sanctioned red light district where the profane met the musical. It was in the saloons and dance halls of Storyville that the first jazz pioneers, like Buddy Bolden and a young Louis Armstrong, began to experiment with sound. Imagine the smell, expansive French perfume mixing with the scent of cheap cigars, stale beer, and the muddy river water. The second-line tradition was already a staple. Funerals weren't just about mourning. They were about celebrating life with a brass band leading the way. A New Orleans funeral began with a somber dirge, but once the body was cut loose, the music exploded into a joyful, syncopated dance. The Mississippi River was the city's lifeblood. Steamships with giant paddle wheels lined the levee, belching black smoke into the humid sky. Stevedores sang work songs as they loaded ships. These rhythmic chants would become the backbone of the blues and jazz melodies we know today. The French market was a labyrinth of flavors. Coffee with chicory, fresh oysters from the Gulf, and the shouting of vendors in a mix of English and Creole French. Creole culture was the secret ingredient, a sophisticated blend of European heritage and African soul that created a unique social class and a unique sound. In 1910, the streetcars were still mostly horse-drawn or early electric. They rattled through the narrow streets, connecting the diverse wards of the city. Canal Street was the great divider. It was the widest street in America, separating the old French Quarter from the American sector. Fashion was a mix of Caribbean light fabrics and Victorian formality. Men in linen suits and straw boaters. Women in lace dresses, carrying silk parasols to block the sun. The voodoo influence was a quiet but powerful undercurrent. Marie Laveau's legacy lived on in small shops, selling grease bags and charms in the shadows of the quarter. Nightlife was electric. Before the radio, the only way to hear the new sound was to be there. The air vibrated with the brassy wail of cornets. Jazz wasn't called jazz yet. It was called hot music or ragtime. It was dangerous, it was new, and it was irresistible to the youth of 1910. Ultra-realistic AI lets us see the steam rising from the gumbo pots and the moisture on the cold bottles of local beer. It's history you can breathe. We see the texture of the weathered wood on the riverfront, the rust on the iron gates, the sweat on a musician's brow as he hits a high note. New Orleans was a city that never really slept. The Lulu White's Mahogany Hall was a palace of vice and music that defines the era's excess. But behind the music, life was hard. Yellow fever was still a memory, and the drainage system was a constant battle against the sinking land. The city is built below sea level. In 1910, the pumps were a new miracle of engineering, trying to keep the Crescent City from returning to the swamp. Religious life was a spectacle. Catholic processions with elaborate statues shared the streets with the raw, emotional energy of Protestant shouting churches. Everything in New Orleans was a performance. Even the way a street vendor sold blackberries was a song. The Mardi Gras of 1910 was already a legendary event. Hand-painted wooden floats, pulled by mules, and the first Rex King parading in silk and gold. We see the AI reconstruction of the Eagle Saloon, the dark wood, the brass rails, and the smoke-filled air where jazz was being perfected. Communication was through gossip. Newspapers like the Times pick you in, and the songs that traveled from one neighborhood to the next. The 1910s saw the arrival of the first recording machines, but they couldn't capture the true soul of a New Orleans night. Food was the city's other religion. Jambalaya, crawfish, and the po' boy. Simple ingredients turned into a feast for the working man. The timidity made everything grow. Ferns erupted from the cracks in the walls, and jasmine vines choked the iron balconies with sweet-smelling flowers. We see the faces African, French, Irish, and Italian. A melting pot that actually melted, creating a new American identity. In 1910, the Great Migration was beginning. Musicians started to take the riverboats north to Chicago and New York, carrying the seeds of jazz with them. The riverboats were floating ballrooms. They were the internet of 1910, spreading the new hot music up the Mississippi. AI captures the flickering light of gas lamps, reflecting in the rain puddles of Bourbon Street. A city of shadows and neon before neon existed. The Congo Square legacy reminds us that jazz was born from a struggle for freedom. Every syncopated beat was a declaration of independence. New Orleans was a city of benevolent societies. Social clubs that provided insurance, brass bands, and a sense of belonging to the community. The 1910 census showed a city on the verge of the modern age, yet still clinging to its colonial ghosts. The smell of roasted coffee beans near the docks, the heavy scent of the river, the dry dust of the cotton warehouses. We see a young Louis Armstrong as a boy, perhaps delivering coal or selling newspapers, listening to the music he would one day conquer. History records New Orleans as a city of sin, but the music records it as a city of salvation. Everything was built to survive the water and the wind, cypress wood and heavy stone. A city that refused to be washed away. As the decade progressed, Storyville was closed by the Navy, forcing the music even deeper into the heart of the city and the world. If you could walk through a door into 1910 New Orleans, would you follow the sound of the trumpet or the smell of the kitchen? We lost the silence, but we gained a heartbeat. New Orleans in 1910 was the world's first remix culture. The spirit of 1910 still lives in the brass bands of today. The lineage is unbroken. It was a place where the sun was hot, the food was spicy, and the music was life itself. Looking back, we see that the birth of jazz wasn't an event. It was a consequence of a city that dared to be different. The ghosts of the quarter still dance to the music of a century ago. You just have to listen between the notes. History is a song that New Orleans never stopped singing. This was the forgotten soul of the South, the birth of the sound that changed everything. If this journey through Old New Orleans moved you, like and subscribe. We bring the world's most musical history back to life every week. Laissez les bons temps râler.